Everyone wants to win the game. Most people spend their entire careers trying to get picked, trying to get noticed, trying to get someone with power to say yes. Tyler Perry didn't do that. He looked at the game, decided the rules were designed for him to lose, and quietly built a completely different one on 330 acres of land that used to be a U.S. Army base in Atlanta. This isn't a story about talent. Plenty of talented people never get a shot. This is a story about leverage, distribution, ownership, and what happens when someone refuses to let an industry decide their value. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how Tyler Perry built one of the most strategically airtight media empires in modern entertainment, and why most people completely missed it while it was happening. Here's something Hollywood believed for decades. Black churchgoers don't go to the movies. Not a rumor, not a quiet assumption, an actual industry position. Studios looked at the data they had, looked at who they were marketing to, and decided an entire demographic wasn't worth chasing. That's not just arrogance. That's a market inefficiency, and market inefficiencies are how empires get built. Tyler Perry saw an audience that was hungry, loyal, underserved, and completely invisible to the people with the money. A church-going Southern Black American audience that watched Tyler Perry's stage plays in massive numbers and felt genuinely seen by the stories he was telling. Hollywood wasn't making content for them. Tyler Perry was. And that gap, that enormous, obvious gap, became the foundation of everything. Before any of this, there were the stage plays. Perry had been touring with Madea Stage Productions since the mid-90s. These weren't small shows. These were sold-out church auditoriums and regional theaters packed with exactly the audience Hollywood said didn't exist. He was financing them himself, marketing them through church networks and gospel radio, building a direct line to his audience with zero middlemen. Think about what that actually means. While Hollywood was spending millions trying to figure out how to reach Black audiences through traditional media channels, Tyler Perry had already built a grassroots distribution machine that required none of that infrastructure. He knew who his audience was. He knew where they gathered. He knew what they wanted to feel. That's not just a fan base. That's a deployment network, okay? Now, here's the interesting part. When Perry eventually approached Hollywood with his work, the response was predictable. Pass. They didn't understand the audience, didn't trust the material, didn't believe the numbers from the stage tours meant anything for cinema. A lesser strategist would have kept knocking. Perry stopped knocking entirely. He took the loyal audience he'd spent a decade building through stage tours and direct marketing, and he used that proof of concept to go make Diary of a Mad Black Woman himself, independently financed, independently distributed through Lionsgate, with a marketing campaign built largely around the same church and community networks he'd been using for years. Opening weekend, $21.4 million on a $5.5 million budget. For context, the studio system had been telling him his audience didn't go to the movies. His audience went to the movies. Most people look at that number and think, great, he proved them wrong. That's the surface read. Here's the deeper one. Perry didn't just make money, he proved the existence of a market that the entire Hollywood apparatus had failed to identify. He showed that there was a massive, reliable, repeat viewing audience that was actively looking for content that reflected their lives and wasn't getting it. And he had done it outside the system. That matters because when you prove something outside the system, you don't owe the system anything. He didn't need to go back to the studios and negotiate from weakness. He walked in with receipts, and even then, this is the move most people miss. He was careful about how much of himself he handed over. Let's talk about how Hollywood actually works. When a studio makes your film, they own it. When they distribute it, they take a significant cut. When they greenlight your TV show, they own the masters. When they build your set, they own the real estate, the talent, the writer, the director, the creator gets paid, sometimes very well, but they don't own the asset. They own the check. Perry watched this system closely, and from the very beginning, he structured his business to retain as much ownership as possible. His production company, Tyler Perry Studios, wasn't just a vanity label. It was a deliberate ownership structure designed to keep the assets inside his control. This is where the business mind shows up. Because here's the thing, most people don't track. The real money in media isn't in getting paid to make content. It's in owning content that continues to generate revenue long after you've moved on to the next project. Perry understood that early. Let's use Madea as the running example here because it's one of the most strategically interesting character decisions in modern entertainment. Hollywood critics mocked Madea loudly, repeatedly, with great confidence. The character, a loud, gun-toting, no-nonsense elderly black woman, played by Perry himself, was dismissed as lowbrow, as a caricature, as the kind of thing serious filmmakers don't do. And while the critics were writing those reviews, Perry was quietly running one of the most efficient content machines in Hollywood history. Think about what Madea actually was from a business perspective. A single character, owned outright, recurring across multiple films, each film marketable to a pre-existing loyal fan base. Low production costs relative to mainstream studio films, consistent box office returns. Madea wasn't a joke. Madea was an annuity. Every time Perry released a Madea film, he wasn't gambling on whether audiences would show up. He already knew they would. He had the data from the stage plays, from the previous films, from years of direct audience engagement. That's not creative luck. That's systematic, repeatable revenue generation. But the film business has limits. Films take time. Films carry risk. Films require theatrical distribution infrastructure that Perry didn't fully control. So Perry looked at television. Specifically, he looked at a cable network called TBS that needed content, and he made a move that, at the time, looked completely insane to industry insiders. He filmed 10 episodes of House of Pain with his own money before anyone had agreed to air it. 10 episodes, out of pocket, no network deal, no guarantee of distribution. The conventional wisdom in TV development is that you film one pilot, you shop it around, you hope someone picks it up. You definitely don't spend millions producing a full run of episodes on speculation. Perry did it anyway. And it worked. Partly through timing, a merger between networks created a sudden content gap that needed filling fast, and partly because when you arrive with finished product, instead of a pitch deck, you completely change the negotiation. You're not asking for permission anymore. You're offering something real. This is worth pausing on because it's a principle that applies way beyond television. When you show up to a negotiation with a pitch, the other side has all the power. They can say no. They can lowball you. They can string you along for months. They control the timeline. When you show up with a finished product that already has proven audience demand behind it, the dynamic shifts. Now they're evaluating something real. Now there's a cost to saying no, because if they pass, someone else might pick it up. Now the timeline belongs to you. Perry has used this approach repeatedly throughout his career. Don't ask for permission. Build the thing. Show up with leverage. House of Pain became the highest-rated show in basic cable history at the time of its premiere. Over 1,600 episodes of television were eventually produced under Tyler Perry's banner. Not 16, not 160, 1,600. That's an almost incomprehensible volume of content for a single creator-owned operation. And every episode of that content is an asset. Every syndication deal, every streaming license, every international sale, that's revenue flowing back to a structure that Perry owns. Compare that to the average Hollywood writer or showrunner who creates the content and watches the IP walk out the door to a studio that monetizes it for decades. Perry kept the door. Now let's talk about the move. In 2015, Tyler Perry purchased Fort McPherson, a decommissioned U.S. Army base on the southwest side of Atlanta, 330 acres. The deal was reportedly around $30 million. He spent years developing it. In 2019, Tyler Perry Studios officially opened on the site of a former military installation. Perry had built a full-scale studio complex with 12 purpose-built sound stages, production offices, costume and prop warehouses, outdoor sets, and its own infrastructure. For context on what this means, most working actors, directors, and producers in Hollywood rent space. They shoot on lots owned by Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, Paramount. They pay for access. They work within someone else's facility, on someone else's timeline, by someone else's rules. Tyler Perry owns the lot. When you own the lot, your cost structure changes completely. You're not paying rent on a sound stage. You're not navigating another studio's scheduling conflicts. You're not subject to someone else's rate increases. You shoot when you want, how you want, at a cost that you control. This wasn't a random location decision. Georgia had introduced significant film tax incentives that made it increasingly attractive for production. Atlanta was becoming a genuine production hub. Black Panther, Avengers, Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, all shot there. Perry was early to that shift. By building in Atlanta rather than Los Angeles, he avoided the highest operational costs in the industry, positioned himself in a growing production ecosystem, and anchored himself in a city with a significant and loyal Black population, the same community that had been his audience from the beginning. The geography of the decision was strategic, not sentimental. Let's zoom out and look at what Perry actually built, layer by layer. Layer one, the audience, built through stage plays, church networks, and direct marketing. A loyal, underserved demographic that Hollywood ignored. Layer two, the content. Films and television produced at volume, owned outright, generating recurring licensing and syndication revenue. Layer 3, the character IP, was Madea and other recurring characters owned entirely by Perry, generating franchise-level returns without franchise-level risk. Layer 4, the distribution relationships. Deals structured to keep Perry in control of his masters while leveraging existing networks for reach. Layer 5, the physical infrastructure. A 330-acre studio lot owned, no rent, no landlord, no permission required. Most people in entertainment build one of these layers. Perry built all 5, and each layer makes the others stronger. The audience funds the content justifies the infrastructure. The infrastructure reduces costs and increases output. The increased output grows the audience. That's not a media company. That's a flywheel. Here's the thing about the people who spent years dismissing Tyler Perry. They were measuring him by the wrong metrics. They were asking, is this prestige cinema? Is this critically acclaimed? Is this the kind of content that wins awards and gets written about in film journals? Those are fine questions. They just have nothing to do with what Perry was building. Perry wasn't playing the prestige game. He was playing the ownership game. And while critics were busy writing about what Madea represented culturally, Perry was quietly accumulating one of the most strategically durable positions in American media. You can dislike the content and still respect the architecture. Here's what rarely gets said clearly. Tyler Perry proved something that the entertainment industry spent decades pretending wasn't true, that black audiences are not a niche. They are a massive, loyal, economically significant market that was being systematically underserved, not because there wasn't demand, but because the people making the decisions didn't see themselves reflected in that audience and therefore didn't understand it. Perry didn't just exploit that gap. He documented it in real time with box office receipts, with television ratings, with sold-out auditoriums. He didn't just build a studio. He forced an industry to acknowledge the existence of an audience it had been ignoring for its entire history. And that shift, the wave of black-led, black-owned, black-centered media that followed in the 2000s, is partly downstream of what Perry spent 20 years proving was possible. That's not a footnote, that's a legacy. Here's what actually happened. Perry identified an audience that the industry ignored. Yeah, he built a direct distribution channel through the stage tours and church networks. He used that audience as leverage instead of asking for permission. He entered film independently, proved the market, and walked in with receipts. He retained ownership of his content from the beginning. He used Madea as a recurring, low-risk, high-return content engine. He filmed 10 TV episodes on spec and changed his negotiating position entirely. He produced, at scale, over 1,600 episodes, generating compounding IP value. He bought a decommissioned army base and built his own studio infrastructure. He eliminated rent, eliminated gatekeepers, and eliminated dependents. He didn't beat Hollywood's game. He made Hollywood's game irrelevant to him. The real lesson from Tyler Perry isn't about hustle. It's not about resilience. It's not about believing in yourself when no one else does, though sure, fine, that's in there too. The real lesson is structural. When the system isn't designed for you, you have two options. You can spend your career trying to earn a seat at a table that wasn't built with you in mind, or you can build the table. Perry built the table, then he built the building the table sits in, then he bought the land the building stands on. That's the move. If you like breakdowns of the real strategies behind modern empires, subscribe, because there are a lot more of them.